In a world where struggles often feel endless, one man's act of kindness changes everything. Michael Johnson, a father fighting to keep his family afloat, finds himself facing a storm both literal and metaphorical. When he helps a stranded woman on a rainy night, he has no idea that this small act will open doors to a new life. But with new opportunities come new challenges. And Michael must prove he belongs in a world that wasn't built for him. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to start today's story with life stories. It was a stormy night in Chicago. The kind of night that made everything feel heavier, like the world was pressing in on you. The streets were slick with rain, and the distant sounds of thunder were drowned out by the constant hammering of the downpour. Michael Johnson was walking through these streets, pushing a grocery cart that squeaked with each movement. His daughter, Emma, skipped along beside him, her little pink rain boots splashing as she moved, blissfully unaware of the gravity of their situation. The air was cold, sharp, and relentless, but Michael barely noticed. His mind was too consumed by the weight of the day. His last paycheck was gone, and there was no hope of getting another one anytime soon. The diner job he'd lined up had fallen through. They needed someone who could start immediately, and Michael just didn't have the time to wait. Worse still, their landlord had given them until sunrise to clear out. No backup plan, no safety net, just the bag slung over his shoulder and his daughter's tiny hand clutching his fingers. She was the only thing keeping him grounded, the only source of joy in a life that had become nothing but struggle after struggle. As they walked along, drenched and tired, Emma's voice cut through his dark thoughts. "Daddy, look," she said, pointing across the street with excitement. Michael squinted through the rain, his gaze following hers. There, in the midst of the downpour, was a sleek silver Mercedes, parked at an awkward angle, its hazard lights blinking desperately in the dark. Standing beside it was a woman, trying to shield herself with a flimsy umbrella, her other hand clutching a phone as she spoke urgently into it. She was clearly in distress, her body language screaming frustration and helplessness. Michael hesitated for a moment. He had to get to the diner. He was already late, and every second felt like it was pushing them closer to complete ruin. But then he looked down at Emma. Her eyes were wide, filled with empathy and concern. "Maybe we can help, Daddy," she murmured, her voice soft but full of hope. That was all it took. He couldn't say no to her. Not when she still believed in kindness like it was a law of nature. "All right, kiddo," he said, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "Let's go see." They crossed the street, their footsteps muffled by the rain. And as they got closer, the woman turned to face them. Her sharp features were partially obscured by damp blonde hair that clung to her forehead. She was dressed in a tailored blue coat, but it did little to shield her from the storm. Michael lifted his hand in greeting. "Flat tire?" he asked, his voice calm despite the nervousness bubbling beneath the surface. The woman looked him over, her eyes scanning him quickly. He could feel her suspicion, the slight tightening of her grip on her phone. The way her gaze flicked between him and Emma. He knew that look all too well. He'd seen it on the faces of people who didn't trust him, who saw a black man in ragged clothes on a rainy night and assumed the worst. "Yes," she said, her voice tense. "I called roadside, but they're taking forever, and I have a meeting. Can you help?" Michael didn't hesitate. He wasn't interested in her explanations, or the caution in her voice. He could tell she wasn't comfortable with him. But at this point, she didn't have a choice. "I can change it," he said simply. She blinked, caught off guard. "Are you sure? It's pouring out here, and you've got your daughter with you." "It'll be fine," Michael replied, glancing at Emma, who had stepped forward, holding the umbrella over her father's head like a little shield. "I've done this 100 times. Emma beamed up at the woman. "My daddy's really good at fixing things," she said cheerfully. "He says kindness is free, so we should share it with everyone." The woman let out a small, almost reluctant laugh, but Michael didn't look up. He was already kneeling beside the car, rolling up his sleeves and getting to work. His fingers were numb from the cold, and the rain seemed to soak straight through his clothes. But he didn't care. He worked quickly, his movements almost instinctive, a rhythm born from years of doing this same thing. In much worse conditions. Less than 15 minutes later, the new tire was in place. As he stood up, wiping his wet hands on his jeans, the woman let out a sigh of relief. That was fast, she said, clearly impressed. She pulled out her wallet and held out a crisp $100 bill. Here, let me pay you. Michael barely hesitated before shaking his head. No need, I'm just happy to help. The woman hesitated, staring at him with something like disbelief in her eyes. She looked at his tattered shoes, his damp clothes, the tired lines etched into his face. And he knew what she was thinking. This man should not be refusing money. But she didn't press it. Instead, she offered another gesture. Let me give you a ride, she said, her tone firm now. You're soaked. The least I can do is help you get somewhere warm. Michael hesitated, still unsure. He wasn't used to accepting help from strangers. But then he looked down at Emma. Her eyes were filled with excitement at the idea of a warm car. And he sighed. It had been a long time since he'd allowed himself the luxury of thinking about his own comfort. And for the first time in a while, he realized that maybe it wouldn't hurt to take a small break. All right, he muttered, glancing at the woman. Thanks. They climbed into the Mercedes, and as the car's warmth surrounded them, the woman finally spoke, introducing herself as Sarah Williams. Michael froze. That name was too familiar. He had seen it on billboards and in business magazines. Sarah Williams, CEO of Williams Automotive, one of the largest tech-driven auto companies in the country. But instead of reacting with surprise or awe, he simply nodded. She was just another person. Another stranger passing through his life. Emma, on the other hand, was unfazed. She chattered away throughout the ride, talking about how she and her dad always helped people and how kindness was important. Sarah listened, her expression unreadable, but Michael could see something flicker in her eyes. Maybe it was amusement, maybe something else. He wasn't sure, but it wasn't his concern. They arrived at the rundown diner where Michael had hoped to work. And Sarah pulled out a small notepad from her bag. Give me your number, she said, just in case I have another flat tire. Michael was about to brush her off, but something in her tone stopped him. He scribbled his number on a scrap of paper, not expecting it to lead to anything. After all, people like Sarah Williams didn't call people like him. They never did. As he stepped out into the rain once more, he glanced back, just in time to see Sarah watching him through the windshield. Her expression was unreadable, but he felt the weight of the moment settle over him. It wasn't just the storm anymore, it was something deeper. 2 weeks passed, and the days blurred into one long grind. The rain seemed endless, just like the cycle of disappointments Michael was stuck in. The eviction had come, swift and merciless, as if the world itself had been waiting for him to fail. The diner job had fallen through, and with it, the last thread of stability he had clung to. Now, it was just Michael and Emma, moving from one shelter to the next when space was available, or spending cold nights huddled in the car when it wasn't. The money he scraped together from odd jobs barely covered food, and the cracks in his phone screen mocked him. No one called, not even Sarah Williams, the woman he helped with the flat tire. But then, one night, as Michael sat in the backseat of his car, a thin blanket draped over Emma as she slept. His phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. He stared at it for a long moment, uncertain. Who could it be? His heart raced, and with a deep breath, he answered. Hello, this is Michael Johnson. Mr. Johnson, this is Sarah Williams, came the smooth, professional voice on the other end of the line. Do you have a moment? Michael froze. Sarah Williams? The woman from the night he changed her tire? She hadn't called. He hadn't expected her to. But now she was on the line. He felt a flicker of something. Hope? Caution? Yeah, he replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. I've been thinking about that night. She continued, as if they were discussing the weather. And about you. Michael frowned, unsure of where this was going. All right, I ran your name, she said, cutting through his hesitation. Looked into your work history. A pause. I saw your past work at Wexler Auto before the company shut down. You were one of their best mechanics. Michael's breath hitched. Wexler Auto, he had spent years there, learning everything he knew, but it had closed when the market took a dive, and all the skilled workers like him were left scrambling. He had never imagined that anyone would actually care about his past work. That's not something I ignore. Sarah continued. I'm expanding my company, Williams Automotive. We're opening a new facility. And frankly, we need people who know what they're doing. I need a lead mechanic for our maintenance team. Michael's heart skipped a beat. A lead mechanic position at one of the largest auto companies in the country? It seemed too good to be true. I'm offering you the job, Sarah said, almost casually, but Michael could hear the weight in her words. His mind spun. A real job. A stable, paying job. No more scraping by with odd jobs. No more uncertainty. But even as the hope surged within him, doubt crept in. People like Sarah Williams didn't just give out opportunities like this. There had to be a catch. Why me? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause. When Sarah spoke again, her tone was different. It was sharp, but not unkind. You think I'm handing you this because I feel sorry for you? She asked. Her voice firm. No, I'm offering you this because you're good. And I need good people. Michael's chest tightened, the truth of her words settling into him. It wasn't charity. It was about competence. Still, the hesitation remained. What's the catch? He asked. His voice low. I'm offering you a 30-day probation period. Sarah replied. You work. You get paid. You prove you can handle the job. And the position is yours permanently. You screw up, I find someone else. Simple as that. The words were fair, even. Michael nodded slowly, considering the challenge of proving himself to someone like Sarah, to an entire new world, was daunting, but this was his chance. For Emma, for a better life. I'll take it, Michael said finally, his voice firm, though his heart was racing. When do I start? Sarah's voice softened, just slightly. I'll have someone call you with the details. Get ready, Michael, you've got a job to do. As he hung up the phone, Michael stared out the window, his thoughts a whirl of excitement and disbelief. The road ahead had just changed. And for the first time in months, it didn't feel impossible. The following weeks at Williams Automotive were a whirlwind of change for Michael. He had traded the uncertainty of his former life for the steel and glass of the sprawling, modern facility. The building loomed over him each morning as he arrived, its sleek exterior a far cry from the rundown garages and auto shops he had worked in before. He felt like an outsider, a small fish in a sea of professionals who seemed worlds apart from him. The first morning, he stood outside the massive glass doors, gripping the strap of his worn-out duffel bag, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. The office building was a far cry from the rundown workshops he was used to. Its gleaming surface was almost intimidating. But he had made it this far. He wasn't going to back down now. A few paces behind him, Emma clung to his side, her small fingers wrapped around his wrist as she gazed up at the building with wide eyes. Is this where you're going to work, Daddy? She asked, her voice laced with excitement and something else. Hope. Yeah, baby, Michael murmured, forcing a smile he didn't quite feel. This is it. They entered the building, and as Michael walked through the doors, he felt the eyes of the receptionist flick over him. She noted the faded jeans, the scuffed boots, the long day of work he had behind him, and then there was Emma, her innocent gaze so full of curiosity. You must be Mr. Johnson, she said in a clipped tone, her voice polite but distant. Miss Williams is expecting you. Michael nodded, trying to keep his nerves in check. The receptionist picked up the phone, murmuring something too quiet for him to hear. A few moments later, Sarah Williams herself appeared, her sharp heels clicking against the polished tile floor as she moved toward him with purpose. She was dressed in a crisp gray blazer, her hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. She radiated authority, everything Michael wasn't used to. He felt out of place, but he swallowed it down. You're on time, Sarah noted, her tone neutral, as if she hadn't expected him to be. Michael shrugged, his voice dry. Figured that'd be a good start. The tension between them was palpable. But Sarah didn't seem to notice. She looked down at Emma, who was standing close to her father, staring at Sarah with wide, unfiltered curiosity. For a moment, there was a slight shift in Sarah's expression, something Michael couldn't quite place. Then, she turned back to him. I thought we agreed you'd start today. Sarah continued, her voice cutting through the silence. The receptionist, who had been silent up until then, spoke up with a subtle edge in her voice. Is she going to be staying here? She asked. Her tone not so subtle in its judgment. Michael stiffened, but before he could respond, Sarah intervened. She'll be fine, she said, her voice cool and decisive. We have an employee daycare down the hall. You can leave her there while you're working. Michael glanced down at Emma, unsure. He had never been apart from her for long, and the idea of leaving her alone in a daycare, in a place that felt so foreign to him, was unsettling. But Emma looked up at him, her small face filled with excitement at the idea of making new friends. Yeah, I can make new friends. Daddy, she said, her voice hopeful. It was a decision he didn't want to make. But he nodded. Okay, baby girl, if you're sure. She nodded back, her enthusiasm undeterred. Sarah gave a slight nod of approval and gestured for Michael to follow her. As they walked deeper into the facility, past towering machines and the familiar scent of oil and metal, Sarah explained the job. I didn't hire you because I like you, she said bluntly, her tone giving no room for misunderstanding. I hired you because you know your way around an engine. You're here to lead the maintenance team and make sure everything runs smoothly. Michael nodded, his mind focused on the task at hand. He didn't have time for anything else. He just needed to prove he was worth the chance Sarah had given him. They reached the garage, and a group of mechanics stood by the workstations, their conversations falling silent as Sarah entered the room. Michael could feel their eyes on him, judging, assessing. One of them, a tall man with a thick beard and a permanent smirk, stepped forward, overseeing maintenance. Huh? He said, crossing his arms and eyeing Michael. Funny, I thought we already had people for that. Sarah didn't miss a beat. And now you have someone better, she replied, her voice unwavering. The tension was thick in the air, but she turned to Michael and gave him a look that clearly said, it's your turn. Michael wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew he had to do what he had always done, keep his head down, focus on the work, and prove himself. He didn't need to win anyone over. He just needed to do the job right. And so, he did. He worked tirelessly through the first week, not engaging with the hostile murmurs and sideways glances, but instead immersing himself in the machines, getting a feel for the place. He couldn't afford to let his pride get in the way. Every day was a test. But the quiet challenge from the other mechanics, particularly Rick, was a constant reminder that this world wasn't his. At least, not yet. He was prepared for the long road ahead. This wasn't the end, it was just another starting point. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, this time it could work. As the days passed, Michael began to feel a shift. The work was grueling, but the longer he stayed, the more he proved his worth. He had earned the respect of some of the men in the shop, especially after a major breakdown in the press machine. He didn't back down, even when Rick, the most skeptical of them all, tried to undermine him. Michael fixed the machine, saving the company thousands of dollars in downtime. And in that moment, he knew he belonged here. The probation period was finally over. Michael stood in front of Sarah's office, the weight of the moment settling over him. He had made it. He had earned his place. He wasn't just another man in coveralls anymore, he was a lead mechanic, a valued part of the team. Sarah's approval came not in grand gestures, but in the quiet nod of recognition. As he picked up Emma from the daycare, her face lit up with excitement, showing him the picture she'd drawn of their new life. Michael smiled, holding the crumpled drawing to his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could breathe. And as they walked out to the parking lot, Sarah was there, Waiting. You made it, she said simply, her tone more human now. I don't do this often. But you were right back then. People like me don't usually notice people like you. And when we do, it's not always for the right reasons. But I saw something in you. Michael nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He hadn't just been given a chance out of charity. He had earned it. As they drove off, Emma's laughter filling the car, Michael looked out at the road ahead. The future didn't feel impossible anymore. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life stories and meaningful lessons.